Hello everyone. This is Rahul Sehgal, and this is the last but not the least track and the grand finale of the careers track at IGDC. Welcome. And we have someone that all of you have been asking for a long time. So I have, because I teach and I have a YouTube channel, and the one question that everyone asks me, if I had a dime for every time someone asks me a question, how do I get, uh, you know, how do I get to study? How do I get to work in the US? How do I get to join the game industry in the United States, which is it's the mecca of video games. How do I get to do that? If I had a penny for that, I at least have a PS5. So, uh, so to answer that question, we've got none other than Ben. So Ben Ellinger, I hope I'm saying your name
Yep.
right. Ellinger is he is the president of software development at Digipen Institute of Technology, which is arguably one of the best game colleges in the world. And so a little bit about Ben. Now Ben broke into the game industry more than 20 years ago at Steve Jackson Games, believe it or not, where he worked on board games such as Car Wars and role-playing games such as GURPS. Later, he worked as a programmer, GURPS, sorry, and he
Yep.
worked as a programmer and designer on real-time strategy games, including This Means War and Dawn of War, and MMOs such as Ultima Online, Ashes Empire, and The Matrix Online, as well as Bicycle Texas Hold'em, the Fable 2 pub games, and the secret Microsoft Kinect. So, and he is going to be telling you all about Digipen. He's going to be telling you about education in the US. He's also going to be telling you a little bit about how you can actually work in the video game industry in the United States. So, the one thing I will say is that we have a feedback form which I have put into the handout. So at the end of the talk, please, I'd really appreciate it if you could go and give us feedback on the talk and how we can improve, etc. That would be really great. And also, have any questions, please type them in the chat. And at the end, there will be a question answer session about at least 10-15 minutes. And we will try and answer your questions as much as possible. So without further ado, take it away, Ben.
All right. Well, it's great to be here and happy to really talk to you guys. I'm over in the U.S. I'm actually in Seattle, but just got up an hour ago or so. But it's really great to talk to you guys. And so, what the introduction from Rahul, gives you the basics of who I am. I am the VP of Software Production at Digipen, and that, of course, really means that I oversee a lot of the actual game production projects at Digipen. These are student projects, but there's a lot of them at Digipen. We do them all the time, both at the undergraduate and graduate level. So it's a big part of what Digipen does. And with my background, I've been at Digipen now for 18 years as both a part-timer and full-timer, even while I was working at Microsoft. So I've got a lot of production experience. I've got a lot of programming experience. I'm an experienced engineer, but also an experienced designer and teach a lot of design classes as well, and a little bit of production. I've been a PM at Microsoft. And so I've got a lot of different experience in a lot of different areas. So what I'm going to talk to you today about, though, is the areas that I've got both from my professional experience, but also my educational experience of seeing what it's like to actually get the skills you need to be able to work in the game industry, but also what it takes to get to the US, which is not easy. So the real question is, how can you start making a career in games in the United States of America? Okay, that's the big thing. That's what you're interested in. That's what you're trying to do. But we can't just take it as simplistically as that, because this is really two questions, not one. The first question is, how can you start making a career in games, right? That's one question, right? That's different from the United States part. And so that's a critical piece. If you don't get the base skills to actually be able to make games, it doesn't matter if you're about trying to get to the US and do it at companies here. You've got to have those skills first. And then the second part is, in the United States, how do you get that? That's a very different question, but I'll go into that a bunch towards the end of this talk as well, about what it really takes to actually get into companies professionally and be able to stay there for extended periods in the United States. So the first part of the question, you've got to attain a professional level skill in one of the core disciplines of game development. There is no way around this, right? You must get that professional level of skill. That's not easy. That takes a lot of effort, a lot of training to get to. And so you can't just skip over this. You can't just get too obsessed about the mechanics of getting visas and getting to the US and how this. You've got to have that professional level of skill already. And that's not particularly easy to do. But the first step, if you're going down that path, is to figure out which of the core disciplines of game development you're actually interested in. So those disciplines are coding, art, design, and audio. So of course, coding is programming. This is the hardcore engineering side. Now, there's a lot of ways to learn how to code. You can learn from some online areas where you can look at YouTube videos and take courses online from different places, and that'll get you some of the basics. But remember, we're talking about a professional level. This is what you need to get to. And that's not really going to happen for the vast majority of people with just online education. The number of people who are capable of getting themselves to a professional level on their own is very, very small. And so generally, you're going to need university education to actually be able to get the level of programming knowledge to be able to code at a professional level. So art is similar. You don't just have coders who are making games, you have artists as well. And so while the coders are there building engines and writing gameplay logic and user interface logic and all the other parts that make up the game, you have to have the artist as well, the people who do modeling, the people who do texturing, the people who do animation, environment art, lighting. All of this is part, and concept art as well. All of that is a big part of being a professional artist in the game industry. But again, while you can learn a lot of art on your own, this has to be professional level. You have to not just be good at this, not be able to make stuff that looks beautiful, really works well with the engines that people use, things like Unreal and Unity and custom engines inside different game companies. You also have to do it fast because this is production art. This is where the quantity of art that we have to produce in these large games, you have to be really good and really fast. And again, very few people can get that level of skill on their own. So generally, you need university training for this. And so you need to go to a program that really teaches you how to do computer graphics, how to do art at a professional level. There's also design. Now, design is a little bit more mysterious because a lot of times people don't really quite understand what design is in the game industry. And a lot of times people will think that, oh, that's the person with the ideas for the game. Well, not really. I mean, yes, designers do come up with ideas, but that's 10% of their job. 90% of a designer's job is not coming up with ideas, it's implementing things. And I don't mean coding, though there is technical design, which does involve some coding, but not the deep coding of a real engineer. But the other 5 aspects of design are level design, system design, narrative design, user experience design, and user research. These aren't about coming up with ideas. These are about implementing ideas. How do you make an interesting system that's fun to play but still balanced? How do you actually make a level that has a good arc to it, that actually leads the player through it and guides them to a way to play it that's actually entertaining and doesn't get them lost? How do you actually write a narrative that's engaging? How do you make characters that are compelling and settings that are rich and interesting to explore in a narrative sense? User experience, is the difficulty curve good? How do people learn properly? Is the user interface understandable and easy to use and access? That's a big deal. And then user research. How do you actually really figure out how your game is working? How do you collect data from your playtesters and put them in a way that you can actually use to alter your game in an intelligent way? How do you figure out who actually is the audience for your game and how to target the game to that audience? That's all user research. So that's design. Design is a big field with a lot of specialties. And so that's a little tricky. To get a professional level of design skill before you get into the industry is exceedingly difficult because very few places will actually train you to that professional level at a university. And so Digipen, of course, will do that, but most places out there don't have that depth of design. They have a couple of classes here and there, and that's it. So design, really difficult to get into from the beginning. Coding and art, much more straightforward. There's also audio. Just as with the art, you have the visuals, you still have to have the sound as well. And so people who are musicians and composers, they're a big part of actually making games. However, again, like with design, it's a little harder to get that university education at the level that will work at a professional level for games, because you can be a good composer and a good musician, but you really know how to make dynamic audio for an actual interactive experience. That's a whole nother thing, and almost nobody trains people in that. So if you're thinking about the areas that are more straightforward to get into the gaming industry in, and especially trying to get into the United States, coding and art are definitely the paths. Design and audio can be done, but is a much, much harder path to get into because it's so much more difficult to get to the professional level of skill that would be necessary to get hired by a company for it. So, of course, the Digipen Institute of Technology has bachelor's degrees in all of these disciplines. We've got coding, we've got art, we've got design, and we've got audio, and specific degrees targeted for the game industry in these exact disciplines. And Digipen was the first school ever to offer such game development degrees. We're the ones who started this entire trend. Back 30 years ago, nobody even thought that the idea of doing game development degrees made any sense at all. But we've been here a long time offering the degrees more than anyone else has, and we have graduated more students into the game industry than any other school in the world, and it's not even close. So this is the advantage of going to a place like Digipen. We're not a place that has game development degrees. We're a game development college. This is what we do. This is what we have always done. And so there's a big advantage to going to a place like Digipen. Now, if you can get a bachelor's degree here, that's great, because now that's from the ground up. You spend 4 years in one of these core disciplines. Even if you want to go into design and audio, which are harder to find places to get to that professional level of skill, at Digipen, you can. We've got those degrees. The obvious downside here is that if you're coming from India, if you're coming from other parts of the world, it's often a little more difficult to arrange things so that you can come and get a bachelor's degree. That's a little trickier because it's a longer period of time, it's 4 years. You're often in a situation where you're 18 years old trying to start to do this. It's harder to go to another country and really try and do this. But of course, students do. We have lots of students from around the world, and in particular India, who come for our undergraduate degrees and take that 4 years and get to the point where they have professional levels of skills in these disciplines. So it's definitely something to consider if that makes sense for the situation you're in. If you're really looking where you're going from the ground up, you don't have a college degree already. You, in particular, if you have a college degree, but it's in something that's completely unrelated to game development, where you have a college degree in say philosophy, or some, or history, or some other area that really isn't related at all. It's different if you have a degree in art or programming. Then coming to get a bachelor's degree would really be the way to go, but even if it is a little more difficult. But that is a definite path you can do to gain those skills necessary. And our graduates from our bachelor's degrees, not our graduate degrees, just our bachelor's degrees, have excellent placement rates in the game industry itself. And so we get people the skills you need to get into the industry, even at the bachelor's level. But for many of you, a graduate degree will be more interesting and more the right way to go, because if you've already got an undergraduate degree that has taught you how to code, even if it hasn't taught you how to code games, but it's actually got you a computer science degree of some kind, or very closely related degree, or a undergraduate degree in art of some kind, generally speaking, an art degree that involves computer art, but not necessarily. If it's all actually just traditional art, that works pretty well as well. If you have those bases, you can come to Digipen and get one of our graduate degrees. We have a Master's of Science in Computer Science and a Master of Fine Arts in Digital Art. And so those work as well. And there's a lot of advantages to doing this if you're trying to come to the US and get in the game industry. Besides the fact that if you get the graduate degree, you'll be at a higher level of coding or art than someone from an undergraduate degree. It's also much more attractive for foreign students and companies in the US if they do have master's degrees. And some of that comes down to visas, which I'll get to in a bit. So this is the one that will make sense for a lot of people. You get a undergraduate degree in art or in programming in India or wherever you are from, and then get a graduate degree from a place like Digipen. Now, you notice it's only coding and art, not design and audio. Why? Well, audio, the problem is the demand just isn't as large. There's not nearly as many audio people on big game teams as there are artists and designers and coders. And so there's commensurate, not as much demand for it. So not enough to sustain a master's degree in art. Undergraduate degree we can do, but even the undergraduate degree is fairly small. And so we can't really do a graduate level one. Design, in theory, we could, and we probably will have a design degree in 3 to 5 years, somewhere in that range. Not for sure, but we probably will. The reason we don't have the design degree is because it's much harder to have a graduate design degree when there aren't a lot of undergraduate design degrees out there. Because normally you want someone to have an undergraduate degree in the subject that they're going into the graduate degree in. But since there are so few design degrees out there, it's really hard to make a sustainable graduate level design degree where people have to come in knowing no real design. And so we haven't figured out quite a way that we're satisfied with that yet. There are a couple that in the US that are worth doing. USC and Carnegie Mellon University are ones that have design degrees, and they are solid. Now, you'd still have the problem if you go in with no real design experience and they have to ramp you up very quickly in 2 years. And so it's a little rough to get to that professional level, even going to those. But they do exist, and so I won't be mad if you go to one of those schools. They're perfectly good schools. Got plenty of friends who teach there. But on the coding and art side, Digipen has those graduate degrees that are really just perfectly set to get you into the game industry. Okay, so that's great, right? That's what you get. You can go whether to another school or to Digipen. You can go get your undergraduate, graduate level education, get those skills that you need. You're now ready to actually get a job in the game industry. But you don't just want a job in the game industry. You want it to be in the United States. And so that, unfortunately, is much trickier. While it is difficult to get the skills needed to be a professional game developer, at least the path is clear, right? It's clear what you can do to do that. It's really in your control as well. And so that's great, right? That at least has a clear path, even if that road is difficult and hard to get to that level. It's at least in your court. You get to control it. But a career in the United States is trickier. So the problem here is that you can get an undergraduate degree in the United States and you can get a job in the United States and actually end up being able to stay here. And that can work. But graduate degrees are a lot better for this, right? If you're really focused on getting in the US, a graduate degree really would be a lot better for you. And it's not just because your skills would be higher than if you had an undergraduate degree. That certainly helps, but that's not the main issue. The main issue is how visas work in the United States for people coming in trying to work in an industry. And graduate degrees are greatly favored in that process. And so if you're really thinking about your path to do this and you want to maximize the chance of pulling it off, a graduate degree definitely is superior. And so it makes it easier to get hired, but critically, it makes it easier to get visas. And this is one of the things that you have to realize. You can't just have stars in your eyes and think that, oh, I'll go to the US, I will learn how to make games, I will get skilled in this, and then great, Nintendo will hire me, and Bungie will be knocking at my door, and it'll be great and wonderful. It's like, well, the problem is you're not a US citizen. And so you have to get a visa. You'll get a visa to study here, but that's a lot easier, right? Getting the visas to study here are not generally a barrier. But then once you have completed that education, you have to get a work visa to actually be able to work in the United States, as most countries do of this kind, right? And so you have to convince the United States that it's worth having you have that visa instead of somebody else. And that's the tricky part. And this is why the graduate degree matters so much, because it gives you a leg up over people who do not have graduate degrees. And in the US currently, that's a big part of the consideration when you're trying to get visas is they look and see if you have higher levels of education, especially graduate degrees of any kind. That puts you in a favored status for getting visas. Does not guarantee it at all, but it definitely puts you in a bucket that is much more likely to be able to get that visa. Now, the visa rules in the United States are difficult to navigate. They change frequently as well. I mean, if you from the outside, it may be hard to keep track of the political situation in the U.S., but one of the things that is a big argument politically between the major political parties in the United States is immigration policy. And so there are both parties tend to have different views of what immigration should be done. So one party believes that immigration should be increased and have a lot more people come into the U.S., even permanently, and become citizens. Another party actually has it where they believe that there should be less and they're less welcoming of foreigners. But even within both of those parties, there are some parts of the parties that believe the opposite of what the party believes as a whole. So there's a lot of back and forth and negotiations and weird stuff that happens even when we get a new Congress or a new president. So every 2 years and every 4 years, the exact rules for how visas work in the United States can change. So this is rather frustrating, of course, for someone trying to get one of these visas. And it's often why to really do this well and have a really good shot at it, you often need professional legal help to really obtain a visa or have the best shot at obtaining a visa. This is unfortunate, but it is the reality of if you really want to have that good shot, you often need that person to help navigate the changes and the oddities of the United States visa system. But if you do have that graduate degree, that absolutely will help you. Currently, the US in a lot of these categories, and I'm not even going to get into some of the more complicated visa types, but the standard visa types are often done by a lottery where there's just a random chance that you will be able to get a visa to work in the US. But that lottery is not just random among all people who apply. It's something where you get favored if you do have a graduate degree. So that does help you. But there's also another part of this that comes into it where because of the difficulty and strangeness of how you have to do this, what you really want is you want a company on your side trying to help you get that visa. That's a big deal because in the visa process, if you have a large company, especially arguing on your behalf, saying, we need this person to work for us, that helps you a ton. That's something where then the odds of you getting a visa go way up. And plus, they can help you with that professional legal help. So you don't have to try and find that on your own. So, okay, how does that relate then back to what your degree is? Well, if you get a graduate degree, especially, it can be somewhat for an undergraduate degree, but especially if you get a graduate degree from a place like Digipen, well, then you're also in an area where there are lots of companies around you. If you're in the Seattle area where Digipen is located, this is the heart of the software world here. This is Microsoft. This is Amazon. Google has offices here. I mean, and game companies like you wouldn't believe. So that has an advantage in that it's easier to get internships and jobs, entry level jobs at those companies. And if you do, they can help you get the visa, and especially if you have that graduate level degree. So this is something you really want to consider. Now, there is a thing where you can work in the US on a student visa. It's a little tricky in that it's a time limit on it. You graduate and then currently you have about a year where you can work without getting the regular visa. You can still stay with a student visa. Now you got to watch out because these rules can change out of nowhere. So you have to be a little careful about anything I say about, I'm saying in general how it's been done, right? Don't take it as a permanent thing because these things do change. But that means you have some time. And so if you're here in the United States on a student visa, and you can get hired by a company that's willing to do it, even though they don't know whether you've got the full visa yet. If they really like you, they may be willing to help you get that permanent visa. And that's a big deal. That helps you immensely in your odds of actually being able to work in the US. But so you notice that there's an advantage beyond just getting the skills you need so that they'd want to hire you. Even just already being in the US on a student visa gives you an avenue into working in the US that can lead to a regular work visa in a way that it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to do just by trying to get into a company without having a student visa at all. And so this is a big part of it. So if you really want to think of maximizing your odds of getting that career started in the US, getting a graduate degree here from a place like Digipen, then getting a job here while you have that window of time where you can still work in a student visa, then being able to get help to convert that to a regular work visa, that's your best shot. Now, the problem is it won't guarantee anything, that there is just no way to guarantee you can pull this off. It's tricky. Getting a graduate degree from Digipen will absolutely help. It will give you a decent shot at it. It's not a one in a million thing. We have people do this all the time, but it is definitely something that you can't just completely count on. But also, even though Digipen can't offer help in the sense of pure legal help for getting a visa, we do have a lot of people like me and others here who are at least somewhat familiar with this process and can at least help you navigate that and give you references and help out any way we can. So that's another advantage as well. So that's the overall, presentation I have for it to give you a base idea of what's going on. But let's see here if I can unshare the screen. See if this unshare the screen for it. I'll put up. Okay, I think I am back. I just want to make sure you guys are now back to my screen. So with this for that's kind of the general overview of how you might approach getting a degree, getting the skills that you need, and getting yourself well positioned to get a visa and actually start a career in the U.S. But now I want to turn it over to all the questions you have on any area of this, just because I don't really know what are the areas that you're really worried about, and how that will all work. And so I'm going to start with the questions in the Q&A. I think there's some questions in the discussion as well. You can redo those in the Q&A if you want. I will get to those eventually. I'm going to go through the ones in the Q&A first, since that's the proper place to put the questions. So let's see. What do we have to stop? At the top, we've got a question: what are normal GRE and TOEFL scores required to get into Digipen game development program? So there's not an absolute value, right? I mean, we don't have exact cutoffs. The TOEFL scores that you need, I don't remember the exact numbers because I've seen them a bunch, but I don't remember where the cutoff is. But the education is in English, and boy, when you're talking about graduate education, that's not just basic English either, right? I mean, you need to be pretty decent at English. Heavy accents, some struggle in parts of it, no problem, right? But you need to be able to handle highly technical terms, whether it's in art or in programming. And so you do need a decent TOEFL score to get in, right? I mean, I don't know the exact number for it though. But if you're looking at the GRE, of course, the GRE matters much, much more for the computer science program than the Masters of Fine Arts. Because Master of Fine Arts, I mean, sure, we'll look at your GRE, but I mean, come on, it's your portfolio. That's what matters, right? But on the Master's in Computer Science side, your math GRE is quite significant. And again, there's no magic number for it, but the higher the better. It's definitely correlated with your success in a computer science program. Not absolute. I mean, it's not a math degree, but you do take some pretty advanced mathematics, and so you do need a decent GRE score. But there's no exact number. There's no cutoff. I mean, if you had a relatively low GRE score, but otherwise your application looked fantastic and you had a great essay for it, and your background and your grades were really good, I mean, we could very well take you even without that. We evaluate the entire student, not just one test score somewhere. Then what kind of financial aid can an individual from India receive, if any? Quite difficult to, right? Of course, the U.S. government won't give you any, right? And so a lot of students in the U.S. get subsidized loans from the government, but if you're not a citizen, they won't give you anything for that. And so you, in theory, can get a merit scholarship. There are merit scholarships available for some students that can reduce the cost for it, but of course, there's a limited number of those, especially because Digipen is not MIT, it's not Stanford. We don't have billions of dollars in endowments, so we don't have a big pool of money to hand out scholarships to people. And so we do have some. They absolutely do exist, and you can apply for those as part of the admissions process, but it's not nearly as extensive as a place like Stanford or MIT or places like that might have.
The one thing I'd like to say is that there are some, if you have a relative in the US, because I've taken a loan to go to a college in North America, which was Canada. So if you have a relative or an uncle who's in the United States, that he could actually co-sign a loan for you. That's actually a possibility.
So that's a good point. I mean, it's not exactly financial aid because it's just a straight up loan, right? So it's not as much. But
yeah, I think he does mean financial aid.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's always that thing about what financial aid is, where if it's a grant, if it's a scholarship, right? Of course, that's real financial aid. You love that. What about if it's a government loan? Well, they're low interest rates, and you don't have to pay them back for quite a while. And so, I mean, kind of financial aid, it helps. And then there's private loans. And so right, private loans are similar, but they have higher interest rates, and so it's not as
Yeah, because
ideal.
in
But
India, you have the cost of money is really high. So if you have to
yeah,
take a loan, a bank loan, an education loan, it cost you maybe 10, 12%. And if you
oh,
take
that's
the
huge,
same
right?
one in the
No,
US,
it's
it will be
much
5
lower
or
in the U.S.
6%.
Yes, much lower, right? And the government ones are down at just like 2%, things like that. And so yeah, I mean, if you're looking at it from the point of view of normally expecting a 10 to 12% rate on loans, you generally can get something much better if you had somebody in the U.S. That they're less likely to give you that loan if you're just from India saying, "Hey, I'm moving to the U.S. Can you loan me money?" That's a little harder. But if you have someone in the U.S., that can help a bunch.
Yeah, this third one is really good about a future student. How important is having an experience beforehand? Because a lot of people come to me and they're basically they've never made games, and the thing is, I want to go abroad, do an education in the US, and go straight into the game industry. And I tell them, look, that's not how it works. So, your thoughts on that?
Well, so the thing is, is the type of experience you mean, right? I mean, you're always, if you have actual industry experience, this is always better for you, right? I mean, of course, right? It's always better, right? So if you can get a job at a game studio at age 18 and work for several years, right, of course that's going to be amazing. That will help a bunch. But who can do that, right? I mean, that's really difficult to do. I mean, how do you get the skills to get in there for it? So prior experience is always good, right? It's always helpful, but it's not necessarily expected. So if you're talking about going into a company in the U.S., Bungie, a Microsoft, something like that, they routinely hire people right out of school. And they want to do that because they want to get people who are young, have learned the latest stuff that is being taught, and put that into the company along with their veterans. And so they're not expecting you to have experience in the sense of actual professional industry experience, but they are expecting you to actually know how to do your job. And so that's one of the problems of, like, say, getting just a regular programming degree at a regular university. And now you're going to go to Bungie and say, "Hey, I want to be a graphics programmer for you." And they're going like, "Cool. So you know how to do graphics programming, right?" And you're like, "I took a class in it once where we learned the basics," and like, that's not what we really need. We need somebody who actually knows what they're doing. So you go to a place like Digipen, and instead of taking that one class in graphics programming, you take 6 classes in graphics programming and actually build an engine yourself in multiple projects over the course of your entire time here, working with different teams. I mean, it's a very different world, right? You really learn how to do this stuff for real. And so that's the type of experience you generally need, right? And it's one of the reasons to go to a place like Digipen, because we will get you what is the equivalent of real world experience while we're educating you. Digipen is incredibly project based in its nature. We have plenty of academic classes, but all the time you're also taking these group project classes that simulate essentially an indie dev company making real games. And so that's why a lot of companies really like hiring from Digipen, is because you hire somebody from Digipen, you don't have to wait for a year before they learn how to really do this stuff. They can come in and within 2 weeks, they're actually productive members of your teams because they actually know how to do all of this. And so the thing about getting a master's degree, if you had a really high quality undergraduate degree that was really focused in games, then you wouldn't inherently need that master's degree to get into a company. But if you're trying to come to the U.S., that's where that master's degree matters a lot more. And if you don't have that undergraduate experience that was really focused on games, that's where a master's degree that is focused on games can make all the difference. And so let's see, what are the ratio of studios, companies that sponsor F1 visa students? I don't know the actual ratio. I mean, there's a lot of them that used to do, especially because software companies, not just game companies, but software companies, and especially the large ones in the U.S., routinely do this because they're always starved for technical talent, and so they're always quite eager to anybody of any technical expertise. They're always interested in getting more people like that, whether it's from universities here or getting visas from people from other countries. And so they tend to favor, even if you're from another country, they tend to favor people who do have degrees from here, like graduate degrees, not really just because that inherently makes them better or something, but because it makes it more likely that they can get the visa, right? I mean, because the companies don't necessarily get to decide that. And so they they like spending that because the odds are that their efforts will not be wasted if they, especially someone with a graduate degree from an American university, they believe they'll have a much better chance of actually getting that visa to work, and so they're more likely to actually do it and try and convert that student visa into a full visa for work. And so that's one of the big advantages of doing it. The companies that do it are mainly based on size. The bigger the company is, the vastly more likely it is it will sponsor you for a visa, because then the overhead of doing that is not as big a deal for a large company. But if you want to go to a smaller company, some indie game company, I mean Supergiant or something like that, much better odds that they're like, we can't really sponsor you for that. I mean, if you can get the visa, great, we'll hire you, but we can't really sponsor you for it because they don't have the infrastructure to really do that. But the big companies, especially the Microsofts and the Amazons and the Googles, they definitely will do that. If they decide that they want you, they will help you get a visa. That doesn't mean they can, but they will definitely help. So next one is a game programmer with 4 years experience. Is it better for me to go for a programming master's course, a design course, or a production course in regards to getting better job opportunities and overall career path? So if you're purely just like what maximizes the chance that I will get a job in the US in a game company, right? And hell with your personal desires for what you want or anything like that. You just want to maximize that chance. Absolutely a programming degree, right? Because the thing is, programming is always in such high demand that it is just a different class than every other discipline. Because in all the other disciplines, there are huge numbers of people for not enough jobs. And so you need to be really good. You need to be able to beat out other people in it. And Digipen can help you do that and get you those skills. But for programming, it's not the case. There are not enough programmers to fill the jobs that are out there, and so that utterly alters the demand. And so, if that was all you concerned about, programming is your path. Technical skills are so highly valued and so much in demand. That's always going to be better. Now, I would caution you a little bit though, because that only makes sense if you like programming, right? I mean, if you're sitting there going, it's like, well, I really want to do art. Art is where my heart is, but if programming's a better job, okay, I guess I'll do programming. No, it won't be for you because you're going to be competing against people who love programming. It's not going to work out well, right? So you do need to put that through the lens of what you truly want to do, because just the general numbers do not necessarily apply to you as an individual. But I would assume if you've already got 4 years experience as a game programmer professionally, well, then programming really should be the way to go, because that's going to be the thing that will look quite good. If you came to the US and got a master's degree in computer science and had 4 years as a game programmer professionally, that's going to look really good to an employer in the US, right? The only downside would be like, oh, the visa. We have to deal with the visa, right? But other than that, that looks really, really good. And that 4 years experience will likely still help you get a visa as well. It's hard to tell how much weight they give to it, but it likely will help. And so that's the thing I would recommend in that case, right? Is that you go after that programming master's degree. Let's see. My BTech GPA is less than 2.5. What should I do to get into a master's in Digipen? That's going to be rough because, I mean, in general in the U.S., a 3.0 or better undergraduate GPA is generally what's expected to get into a graduate degree at any school in the U.S., right? And somewhat a lot higher. We'll look at more things. I mean, we'll definitely, we won't just look at somebody with a 3.0 and say, we won't let them in. Depends on the other aspects of what they've got. A 2.5 is really hard. And so if you're going to have a shot at that, the way you're going to do that is try and have really good GRE scores. So that helps, because then if you're going to like, wait a minute, you've got a really good GRE math score, but your GPA isn't that great. Maybe you were just a bit scattered as an undergraduate, but you're actually pretty good at this, right? So that helps. That'll have some more sight. The other thing is do actual game projects on your own, right? Do as much stuff to show us that it's like, look, I know my GPA was a 2.5, but look at the things I've actually built. And then that can make us look at like, well, if he's actually built all that and he has a good GRE score, that GPA looks a little iffy, but really tempting. And then on top of that, if you can get good recommendation letters, that helps as well. And so essentially, you look at GRE scores, GPAs, your essay, your any type of experience you can talk about doing, whether it's professional or just on your own, and then recommendation letters. Well, if your GPA is weak, try and maximize all the others, right? Get those as good as you possibly can to try and make up for that weaker GPA. So the next one is, are there any distance or online courses? We do, but the problem is we can't necessarily just sign you up for a degree in the US if you're not there. And so while we occasionally do some distance and online courses, the degrees are in person. And from an accreditation point of view, these take place in Seattle, in Washington. And so, sure, if you were a resident in the U.S., had the visa to have a student visa in the U.S., which generally requires residency as well, and then you picked one class that was online, happened to be online that semester, sure, you could do that online. But it's not like you can just take it remotely from another country. And because the visa stuff doesn't work, it doesn't work with our accreditation. So you do have to actually be here, even if some of those classes end up being online. But not many of them. Obviously, a lot have it during COVID, right? But in general, the vast majority of our courses are in person when we're not going through a global pandemic. So I do not have any professional 9-to-5 game developer experience, but I've been a freelancer for quite a while. Is this good to include a portfolio? Yes. And is something Digipen looks at as a plus? Absolutely. Because anything that shows, it's not even a question of whether it's good. It's cool if it's good, right? But that's actually not the most important thing. The thing is that you actually went out and did it yourself, even when you didn't have to, right? That's a big deal. That means it shows a level of desire and passion that we'd really like to see. And if you don't have that type of experience, well, at least talk about, why you're passionate about this in your essay. That makes a big deal. But if you could have that thing where it's not just words, right? It's like, nope, I've been doing game jams and I've been, throwing stuff up on Steam, and it's like, yeah, it didn't make much money, but I put it up there, right? And, I did stuff like that. That's a really good indicator that you could be successful at Digipen. So we absolutely do look at that. Let's see. So this one might be too specific, but the School of Tisch requires design students to submit a portfolio. So what, according to you, would be something you'd love to see in a game designer's portfolio? And like maybe board games, digital mini games, and how about an audio clip breaking down a game's design? So yeah, so for our design degrees, which are undergraduate, absolutely do require a design portfolio. Now, the way we do our design portfolio is a little different than some others. What we have you do is you need to submit 3 things, and those 3 things, you need to have an image of the thing, and we just want to see some visual representation of it. But you're not submitting, like if you made a game, you don't submit the game. Submit a screenshot of the game, right? If you made a board game, don't submit the game. Submit a picture of the game setup and everything, just so we have a sense of kind of what it is. But the real part of the portfolio is then the essay for each one of these 3 things that follows, which needs to explain your process in which you made this thing. And we don't even care if it's a game or not, right? It could be a piece of art. It could be something else. But what we're looking for is, in the process of making this, do you understand who you're making it for? And do you understand how to improve it based on feedback from the people you are making it for? We don't actually care if it's any good, because the problem is, if you knew how to make really good things and design really good things, why do you need a degree from us? No, we assume you're terrible at this, and we will teach you how to be good at it. But what we need to see is that you have the mindset of a designer. And the mindset of a designer is, I'm not making this for me. I'm making this for an audience. I'm making it for somebody else. And when I make that for somebody else, I don't just assume that I know how it will work for them. I make it, I see how they react to it, and then I modify it. And I see how they react to it, and I modify it, and see how they react to it. And if you can already do that in 3 different instances that we give you, you have a designer mindset and a much better chance of actually succeeding. And so we don't quite approach it the same way. We're not just looking for something that says, prove that you're already a good designer, right? From our point of view, that's cheating, right? Because come on, we're here to make you good designers. So instead, we want to see, do you have the mindset to be a designer? Not, are you good at it? But absolutely, those things are things we love to see. And so if you do have them as a bunch of games, that's great. We don't really, an audio clip breaking down a game's design is not something that is part of our normal submission process, but it is the type of thing you could refer to. If you say, it's like, hey, I've got YouTube stuff where I break down things in games and everything, cool, all right, that shows you're really interested in it. So that could impress us as well. So how much impact will it have on admission if you failed at a subject in your bachelor's degree in India, but then cleared it later on before applying to a master's at Digipen? Well, so obviously, if you're looking at applying to a master's degree, I mean the standards are higher to get into graduate programs, and so let's say you're doing programming, and you had a undergraduate degree in programming, and so you had a decent overall GPA in this, and so then what happens if you have some spots in your record? They're there. If you got A's on the first attempt of every class you ever took and had a 4.0 GPA, obviously we're more impressed by that. I mean, it's like you appear to be very good at school, right? So yep, we like that, and that will definitely help you. But we do look at the whole thing. We do understand, right? So let's say you had an introductory programming course that you failed. You got an F in, right? And then later you got very good grades in the rest of your programming courses. Well, we look at that and goes like, something must have just happened there, right? I mean, it's like maybe you're just young, maybe something happened in the class, something weird, got sick, something like that. Because clearly you can do all this stuff. You got good grades in the more advanced classes. Surely not a problem, right? So we wouldn't care about that very much. If you get later classes, right, that are more advanced, and you had something where you failed and then took it again, it's still the same type of thing. One or two aberrations there, as long as your overall GPA is good, we're just going to assume something happened that semester, right? That's not going to be that big a deal. Yeah, it's better if you just had straight A's, but I mean, that's not going to be a big problem. But if we see a pattern that concerns us, that might be a difference. So imagine that you had every class that appeared on your transcript where you might have learned data structures, and every single one of those you failed first and then passed it with a C afterwards. That's suspicious. That's worrisome. Really, all your data structure classes? It's kind of foundational. And even when you retook it, you only got a C. Doesn't mean we wouldn't take you, right? Depends on other factors, GRE scores, essays, everything else. But it's be more worrisome. But you shouldn't be particularly worried if you've got that one or two classes that you did badly in and then you did well in them and you took them again. That's not going to hurt you that much.
All right, that was absolutely brilliant. I think we're out of questions, and we had some really good questions, I think, and that pretty much covered everything. And the last thing I will say, guys, I have put a handout. Please go to the handout section, and there is a feedback form there. So please go and just click it. It will take you 30 seconds, I promise, really 30 seconds. So just give us a feedback on the top. Give us a feedback on the session. That would be really helpful. For us to kind of make it better every year. And Ben, thank you so much. That was absolutely brilliant. And I think your presentation was great. You presented things very clearly. I think you answered all the questions and even the question that people asked. Brilliant. Thank you so much, guys. And if so now you know all about Digipen. You know what I mean? So, and I'm sure that this session was really helpful to you. So thank you so much, Ben. And guys, thank you for being here. And this is the last track of the night, the last track of the careers track. And IGDC 2021 is finished. Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you to all our sponsors. Once again, there's a long list which was somewhere, which I was supposed to say, which I have lost now. So thank you to all our sponsors. I'm sorry I've lost your names. Thank you, Ben. Thank you guys for being here. And I will see you next year, guys, at IGDC 20. Hopefully, we'll be seeing each other face to face, and it's not going to be a virtual conference. So thank you, and you have a good night, everyone. And don't forget to fill in the feedback form.
And I put my email address in the chat if you want to contact me for more, and so you can always just email me. It might take a little bit for me to get back to you, especially because remember the time difference, but I will respond to you. So.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Great to see all of you.